The grounded journey begins. Rain poured heavily against the tinted windows of the private hangar as thunder rumbled far above. Lightning streaked through the thick gray sky like an angry reminder that nature was not in the mood to cooperate. Inside the quiet terminal, Sundar Pichai sat calmly in a leather chair, a cup of warm chai in his hands, his phone silent beside him for once. He was dressed not in his usual crisp business suit, but in a simple blue hoodie and jeans. He looked more like a professor on vacation than the CEO of one of the world's most powerful tech empires. He had planned this trip for weeks. Something secret and personal. No press. No media. Not even his closest aides knew the full purpose of this flight. It wasn't about a business meeting or keynote speech. This was something far more important. Something that had been weighing on his heart for years. As he waited, he looked outside through the massive glass window. The runway was barely visible now through the curtain of rain. The storm had crept in faster than anyone expected. He glanced at the clock. They were already delayed. A tall man in a soaked pilot's uniform finally walked into the lounge, wiping raindrops from his forehead. Captain Daniel Moore had flown Sundar many times before. He was respected by the book and known for putting safety above all else. Mr. Pichai, the pilot said with a firm tone, "I'm afraid we can't take off tonight. The storm is intensifying and visibility is dropping below our safe threshold." Sundar looked up, his expression calm, almost unreadable. He appreciated caution. He respected logic. But this wasn't just any flight. This was a promise he had to keep. "I understand, Daniel," Sundar replied, setting his chai down gently. "But I need to get there. It's not optional." The pilot stiffened slightly. "With all due respect, sir, even a few extra minutes in the air tonight could be dangerous. There's lightning in all directions. I'm grounded by law and by conscience." Sundar nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He never yelled. He was not that kind of leader. But something in his eyes flickered, something deeper than urgency. Something personal. "Do we have any alternate options?" Sundar asked, standing now, taller than he looked when seated. "Another route, another aircraft, another airport?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "Weather has shut down the surrounding airspace. Commercial flights are canceled. Private jets are grounded. We're stuck here for the night." Sundar looked down at his phone again. The screen remained black, but deep inside he felt a pulse of emotion. He couldn't fail this promise, not again. The pilot sensed the tension. "May I ask, sir, why is this so urgent?" Sundar's lips parted slightly, but no answer came. Instead, he turned toward the large map on the wall of the terminal, his fingers tracing the route in silence. Just then, a younger airport worker entered the room wet, nervous, and clearly aware of the man in front of him. "Sir, I overheard. There's a storm truck headed towards Springfield Regional. They're monitoring the weather in real time. They might let a chopper through once it clears for a window." Daniel raised his eyebrow. "A chopper? In this weather? That's even riskier." But Sundar's face lit up with a flicker of hope. "What time?" he asked the worker. "They said they'll check again in 1 hour. But they might allow a VFR flight for small aircraft if the window opens. Very tight window. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes, max." Daniel frowned deeply. "Mr. Pichai, this is not worth risking your life over. Whatever's waiting in Springfield can wait till morning." Sundar turned to face him fully now, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them. The pilot had always seen him as a calm, measured man. But now he saw something else, something urgent and heavy. Sundar took a deep breath. 20 years ago, Sundar began quietly. "There was a man named Anil who helped me survive my first year in the U.S. He gave me a place to stay, fed me when I had nothing, encouraged me when I wanted to go back. To India, we lost touch. I tried to find him for years. I finally did. He's dying. He doesn't have till morning." Daniel was silent. The storm cracked outside again, the glass shaking with the boom of thunder. "He's in a hospice in Springfield." Sundar continued. "He doesn't know I'm coming. He's alone. And I promised him if we ever met again, I'd tell him something I never had the courage to say back then. The lounge went quiet. Even the storm seemed to pause for a moment. The pilot swallowed. Hard? You really want to fly into that? I have to, Sundar whispered. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. He looked out the window, then back at the tech titan whose power couldn't part the storm, but whose heart was determined to try. If there's a window, Daniel finally said, we'll take it, but not in a jet. Too risky. And I can't fly the chopper. I'm not certified. But I know someone who might be. Just then, the younger worker spoke up again. There's a retired rescue pilot named Devin who lives about 20 minutes from here. He flies emergency medical flights sometimes. Tough guy. Legendary, actually. If anyone can pull off a storm run, it's him. Sundar turned to the worker with gratitude in his eyes. Can you call him? The worker nodded and rushed out. The room fell into silence again. Sundar sat down slowly, folding his hands. He could feel the weight of time pressing on him like never before. Outside, the lightning danced. Inside, memories surged. He thought. Back to the cramped studio apartment in San Jose, where Anil had shared his bed, split his meals, and helped him navigate a strange new world. He remembered how Anil never once asked for anything in return, how he told Sundar, someday you'll be somebody. Just don't forget the little people when you get there. Sundar had never forgotten. But life moved fast. Success swept him away like a river. And now, on the edge of the storm, he wasn't sure if he was too late. Just then, the door burst open. A tall man in his 50s stepped in, soaked, with a flight bag slung over one shoulder. He had a rough beard, sharp eyes, and a steady walk. This was Devin. Heard someone's crazy enough to want to fly into a storm tonight, he said, eyeing Sundar. I assume that's you. Sundar stood, extended his hand. Thank you for coming. Devin didn't shake it. Instead, he dropped his bag on the table and looked out the window. If we get lucky, we'll have about a 12-minute window. Between two waves, not enough to mess around. I fly, you stay quiet. We touch down, I drop you, and I'm out. This ain't no sightseeing trip. Sundar nodded. Understood. Also, Devin added, if this goes south, you won't be trending on Twitter. We'll be a blip in the storm. I'm okay with that? Sundar said calmly. Devin finally gave him a small nod. All right then, grab your stuff. We leave in 20. Daniel looked at Sundar, concern still on his face. Are you sure, sir? I'm sure, Sundar said. They stepped out into the rain. As the storm raged on. Two men, one driven by duty, the other by something far deeper, walked toward a small helicopter being prepped by flashlight and grit. And inside Sundar's chest, a storm of memories, regret, and hope was swirling even stronger. He knew the risk, but some goodbyes can't wait for morning. Asterisk. The 12-minute Windows rotor blades of the helicopter roared to life, slicing through the heavy rain like a knife through silk. The floodlights of the hangar flickered in the downpour, casting wild shadows across the tarmac. Sundar Pichai stood just outside the hangar doors, his hoodie now drenched and clinging to his skin, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the aircraft, a battered but reliable Sikorsky twin-engine chopper painted in faded red and white. It had once served in wildfire rescues, and now, tonight, it had one mission: to deliver him to a dying man before time ran out. Devin barked instructions to two young crew members who scrambled around the helicopter, checking fuel levels, calibrating instruments, and verifying weather paths on a glowing tablet. Everything was done quickly, but with the kind of precision only earned from years of dancing with danger. This bird's taken more damage than my last marriage, Devin muttered with a half smile, glancing at Sundar. But she flies, and she listens. Sundar offered a quiet nod. There was no room for small talk. The air felt thick, not just with rain, but with the weight of memory. Every second they waited, the window narrowed. He glanced up at the sky. Thunder still rolled above them, but there was a lull, just a small one, in their sheet of water falling from the heavens. The briefest pause in fury. We're going now, Devin said abruptly, climbing into the cockpit. Strap in. We've got 12 minutes to beat death. Sundar climbed into the passenger seat, fumbling slightly with the harness, the cold metal biting his skin. The inside of the chopper smelled of oil and old leather. The radio crackled with static. Outside, the rain began to pick up again. Warning that time wasn't just running out, it was fighting them. The moment the skids lifted off the ground, Sundar felt it, not fear exactly, but something deeper. A blend of vulnerability and determination. He wasn't used to being powerless. Not in boardrooms. Not in decisions that impacted billions. But here, in this flying shell of rivets and hope, he was completely at the mercy of the storm, and of one man's flying instincts. Devin didn't speak much after takeoff. His eyes were locked on the instruments and the tiny green line glowing across the screen that marked their route to Springfield. The wind buffeted them hard, knocking the chopper sideways more than once. Sundar gripped the sides of his seat, breathing through his nose, eyes fixed on the blinking lights outside the window. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside his chest. He thought of Anil again, the man who had once given him a blanket and a warm bowl of dal when he was shivering in a college dorm with broken heat. The man who had helped him build a resume and had lent him $50 to buy his first winter coat. The man who believed in him when Sundar didn't yet believe in himself. And then life had pulled them apart. One job led to another. New cities. Growing responsibilities. And before Sundar knew it, the years had slipped by like pages in a book he'd forgotten to read. Until a week ago, when he received a letter, not an email, not a text, a real paper letter, shaky handwriting, stamped from a hospice center in Springfield. It reads simply, "I don't know if you'll remember me, but I always remembered you. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer, but I hope life treated you well. Anil." Sundar had read the letter 10 times that night. He made calls. He pulled every string, found the hospice, spoke to a nurse named Lisa, who said Anna wasn't expected to make it through the weekend, and now here he was, racing through a storm with the seconds ticking louder than the rotors. Devin's single quotes S voice cut through his thoughts. "We're hitting the rough patch now. Brace." And then it came. A sudden jolt, like being grabbed by the hand of a giant. The chopper dropped several feet in an instant. Sundar's heart slammed against his ribs. Lightning cracked across the sky, so close he could see the forked tendrils racing across the clouds. The rain lashed against the windshield with renewed violence. Devin wrestled with the controls. "Hold on." The chopper twisted sideways, tail dancing in the wind. Sundar clenched his jaw, fingers white on the seat edge. The entire world outside vanished into a blinding blur of white and gray. "We have to climb," Devin muttered, eyes darting to the altimeter. Storm's closing in too fast, but the wind didn't care. It struck again, harder, jerking them violently to the left. Alarm screamed in the cockpit. Sundar's seatbelt dug into his chest as the helicopter tilted, hovering on the edge of balance. Then, suddenly, silence. Not total silence, but relative. The rain eased for just a moment. The clouds parted slightly ahead, a narrow corridor of visibility. Devin muttered something under his breath, then barked into the radio. "Control, this is Rescue Flight Delta 7, requesting immediate visual clearance to Springfield. We are in a brief window. Repeat, we are in a brief window." Crackled response came through. "Delta 7, you are cleared for emergency VFR. Corridor will hold for approximately 9 minutes. Proceed with caution." Devin didn't wait. He punched the throttle forward and the chopper surged ahead like a bird freed from a cage. "We're almost there," he shouted over the sound of the rotors. "You better hope your friend's still breathing." Sundar's chest tightened. He leaned forward, speaking for the first time in over 20 minutes. "He's holding on. I know it." But even as he said it, doubt crept into the edges of his heart. What if he was wrong? What if the letter had come too late? What if all of this flight, this madness was in vain? What if he had waited too long to say the one thing that mattered most? Devin flew with reckless precision, the kind only a retired rescue pilot could muster. The lights of Springfield finally appeared through the rain, tiny yellow dots against the darkness. I see the pad, Devin said. Hold tight. The chopper dropped fast. They landed with a thud on a tiny helipad behind the hospice center, the landing light flickering in the wind. Ground crew ran toward them, holding umbrellas and stretchers. A nurse in scrubs stood waiting at the gate. Soaked and anxious, Sundar didn't wait for a signal. He jumped out the moment the skids touched ground. The nurse rushed forward. Are you Mr. Pichai? Yes, he said, breathless. Come quickly, she said. He's slipping in and out. They ran together through the back door, down a dimly lit hallway that smelled of antiseptic and lavender. Everything felt slow now, like time was stretching painfully. They reached a small room at the end of the hall. Soft light. Oxygen machine humming. And there, on the bed, lay Anil. His frame was thinner than Sundar remembered. His hair grayer, a blanket pulled up to his chest. His eyes were closed, breathing shallow, lips slightly parted. Sundar stepped inside. The nurse touched his arm. He's been asking for someone. We weren't sure who, but he kept saying, Chennai boy. I think that was you. Sundar's throat closed up. He nodded. He stepped closer, slowly, as if walking through memories. He knelt beside the bed, took the old man's frail hand in his. Anil, he whispered. It's me. It's Sundar. A pause. Then. A flicker. The eyes opened barely. But they opened. A whisper, raspy and faint. You came. Of course I came, Sundar said, tears already falling. I'm so sorry it took me this long. Anil smiled weakly. You look different. You look exactly the same, Sundar lied, laughing gently through the tears. Anil chuckled. A cough followed. Sundar gripped his hand tighter. I have something to say, Sundar said, leaning close. Something I never said before. Something I've carried for 2 decades. Anil nodded. Sundar took a breath. You saved me. You believed in me when no one else did. I owe everything to you. And I never thanked you properly. I never told you how much you meant to me. Anil's lips trembled. You just did. And then his eyes closed again. His chest rose. Once? And then it idea in single quotes T. The monitor beeped once, long and flat. The nurse moved forward quickly. But Sundar didn't let go of Anil's hand. He just sat there, kneeling, crying, quietly, whispering, thank you, over and over again, outside. The storm began to rage once more, as if it had waited long enough. The promise that never breathed rain didn't stop that night. It drummed on the windows of the hospice room like 1,000 tiny hammers, each one echoing louder inside Sundar's chest. The nurses had gently turned off the machines and quietly stepped out, leaving Sundar alone with Anil, who now lay motionless beneath the soft white blanket. The faint scent of lavender still lingered, but now it mixed with something deeper grief, memory, and a quiet kind of peace that felt both painful and sacred. Sundar didn't move for a long time. His hand still held Anil's, even though the warmth had already begun to fade. Outside the window, lightning traced silent lines across the sky, illuminating the shadows in soft pulses. Thunder rolled like a slow drumbeat. Inside the room, Sundar could only hear the sound of his own breathing and the occasional creak of the old building as it settled beneath the storm. He had made it just in time. And yet, he felt as if he'd barely made it at all. He remembered the way Anil's eyes had flickered open, the faint curl of a smile that had taken all the strength. The old man had left. He remembered how his name, Chennai boy, had fallen from Anil's lips. Like it was some kind of memory that had kept him alive all these years. It shattered him. All the wealth, all the meetings, all the global influence, none of it mattered in that room. What mattered was that he had come, that he had been there, that he had said the words he had buried for far too long. I'm sorry I waited, Sundar whispered now, voice trembling. I should have come sooner. But the room offered no answers. Only stillness. After a long while, he slowly stood up and leaned forward. He pressed his forehead gently against Anil's and closed his eyes. Thank you for everything, he said quietly. I promise, I'll never forget again. He walked to a small table by the window and picked up the envelope that the nurse had mentioned earlier, a weathered yellowing paper with his name written in shaky handwriting across the front. He hadn't opened it yet. He tucked it into the inner pocket of his hoodie, feeling its fragile presence against his heart. Then he walked to the door, paused, and took one last look at the man who had once opened his home, his table, and his heart to a lost foreign student with nothing but dreams in his pocket. Sundar nodded once, deeply, and stepped out into the dim hallway. The nurse named Lisa was waiting just outside. She had a clipboard in her hands but didn't speak. Her eyes softened as she saw Sundar, and she reached out gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He held on longer than we thought he could," she said softly. "I think he was waiting for you." Sundar nodded. His throat tightened again, but he didn't cry this time. "Not on the outside, thank you," he said. "Do you need a moment before you leave?" she asked. He looked down the hall, at the exit, at the doors that led back to the storm. "No," he said. "I've already stayed too long away from people who need me." She looked puzzled for a second, but then, understanding, passed across. Her face like a quiet wave. "We'll take care of everything here." Sundar walked outside into the cold wind. The rain had not let up. Devon was waiting by the chopper, soaked again, but unfazed. The old pilot nodded at him, then looked toward the sky. "Windows closing," he said. "Storm's growing teeth." "You sure you want to fly back tonight?" Sundar didn't hesitate. "Yes, I have work to do." They boarded the helicopter once again. The rotors screamed into life. As they lifted off, Sundar looked down at the hospice one last time. A tiny yellow light glowed from the room where Anil rested. It faded into the blur of raindrops as they climbed higher into the night. The flight back was turbulent, but Sundar barely noticed. His mind replayed everything: Anil's smile, the trembling words, the final breath, and the envelope still warm against his chest, pressed with the weight of final words left behind. Back in Silicon Valley, the skies were clear but not calm. While Sundar had been gone, a small crisis had begun to brew inside the headquarters of his company, a leaked memo. Internal tensions. Rumors that he had abandoned a critical decision. At the wrong time, teams were divided. The board was growing restless. His assistant, Priya, met him as he stepped into the building just after dawn. Her face looked exhausted, her phone buzzing nonstop. "They're waiting upstairs," she said. "The room is packed. Investors, lawyers, the press is circling." Sundar nodded. "Good, let them wait a little longer." He walked past her through the main hallway, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. He ignored the glances, the whispers, the low hum of uncertainty that buzzed through the halls. Instead, he headed to his office, closed the door behind him, and finally sat down alone. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the envelope. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside, a single page. Written in faded ink. "Dear Sundar." Reading this, then somehow, "The years found a way to bring us together one last time. I never told you, but I always knew who you would become. The world saw a smart young student, but I saw a kind man, a good man. Not because of your grades, but because of how you treated people who couldn't give you anything. You always thanked me with your eyes, even when you didn't have words. But this letter isn't just for goodbye. This is a reminder. Don't let the machine eat the man. Your brilliance is your gift, but your heart, that is your legacy. Down single quotes. Do you ever forget why you started? With love." Anil Sundar folded the letter with trembling fingers and held it against his chest. Outside the glass windows, the California sun had begun to rise, casting golden light across the skyline. But inside his office, a different kind of light filled the room. One made not of photons, but of purpose. He stood up. Walked to the conference room. And opened the door. Dozens of heads turned. Hushed voices stopped mid-sentence. The tension was thick. But Sundar's expression was calm. "Before we begin," he said softly, "I want to tell you a story." And as the room listened, quiet and unsure, he began to speak, not like a CEO, But like a man who had just come back from the edge of something eternal, he told them about NIL, about what really matters, about storms and promises and showing up when it matters most, and as he spoke, something shifted in the room, a reverence, a realization, and when he finished, there was silence. Not of discomfort, but of respect, then, slowly, one by one, they began to nod, and in that moment, Sundar didn't just lead with strategy. He led with soul, but far beyond that boardroom. A new storm was quietly gathering, one that would test everything. He had just rediscovered, the storm inside the boardroom had never been this quiet. Not even during the company's toughest negotiations or when global crises forced last-minute pivots. But now, as Sundar stood before them, no slides, no charts, just the echo of his story hanging in the air, there was a stillness that no technology could explain. The people around the table had seen him as a strategist, a decision-maker, a visionary. But in that moment, they saw the man beneath all of that. He didn't speak in a rehearsed tone. He didn't try to impress. He didn't speak of profits or projections. Instead, he had told a story about showing up for someone who had once saved his life, not with money or opportunity, but with kindness. And that story, so full of humanity, had reached them in ways no quarterly report ever could. But Sundar knew better than to mistake silence for resolution, as he sat down. The murmurs began to rise again. Board members leaned into one another. Some looked moved. Others looked skeptical. And at the far end of the table, next to the legal counsel, sat Raymond Hartley, one of the oldest board members, a sharp man with a mind like a steel trap. He wasn't unkind, but he was unshakably logical, a numbers-first thinker. Always had been. Sundar, Raymond said finally, his voice polite but firm, we understand the gravity of your personal experience. It was moving, truly, but let me remind everyone why we are here. The spell began to crack. While you were away, Raymond continued, adjusting his glasses. A series of internal leaks occurred. Code Blue is no longer confidential. Competitor analysts are already dissecting it. Our stock fell 3% overnight. Shareholders are questioning your absence. And while you were flying into a storm, the company you lead was being dragged through one. Sundar listened quietly. He didn't flinch. We respect your values, Raymond added, but this board operates on outcomes. If this breach damages our market position, the fallout could be significant. And frankly, your absence during a time of crisis might be seen as negligence. There it was. Not an accusation, but the edge of one. Sundar folded his hands and looked at every person seated at the table. I understand your concerns, he said calmly. And I agree Code Blue matters. Our shareholders matter. Everything we've built here matters. He paused. But if we build everything and forget why we built it, then it collapses the moment something human enters the picture. He leaned forward slightly. When I started in this company, he said, I believed in people more than processes. I believe that technology should serve humanity, not replace it. We have come so far. We've created incredible things. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing the faces behind the numbers. He looked directly at Raymond now. I didn't disappear. I didn't run away. I kept a promise to a man who made it possible for me to be here at all. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter from Anil. He didn't read it aloud this time, but he held it up. This letter reminded me of something. People don't follow titles, they follow truth. And if this company is going to survive the next storm, whether that's competition, regulation, or innovation fatigue, we're going to need more than smart ideas. We're going to need heart. For a moment, no one responded. Then someone from legal leaned in. With all due respect, Sundar, sentiment doesn't stop a stock from dropping. He nodded. But leadership does. He stood again. I'm calling for a reset. Not just a Code Blue strategy, but of how we lead. He turned to Priya, who was standing by the door. Schedule an all-hands meeting for tomorrow. Full transparency. Not a press release. Not a memo. I want to speak to the team directly. Someone at the table gasped. Another raised a brow. Here? Going to address the leak head-on? One executive asked. Yes, Sundar said. I'm going to tell them what happened, what we're doing, and more importantly, why we exist in the first place. You'll spook the markets, Raymond warned. Maybe, Sundar said with a shrug. But I'd rather lose points on the stock than lose the trust of the people who make this place what it is. The room didn't clap. There were no cheers. Just a long pause filled with shifting expressions, confusion, curiosity, even respect. And then the meeting ended. As people filed out. Sundar stayed behind. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling campus below. The buildings were sleek, efficient, built with the same kind of logic that had once driven him to scale heights he never dreamed possible. But now they looked different. Colder somehow. He whispered to himself. Don't let the machine eat the man. That night, Sundar went home not to his mansion in the hills, but to a small rented apartment just outside Mountain View. It was the same one he used to stay in before Google. Before the fame, he needed quiet, not just outside, but inside. He cooked simple rice and dal. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, just like he had with Anna all those years ago. And he thought not about markets. Not about code. But about impact. The next morning. He arrived early at the main auditorium. Technicians were setting up lights and cameras. The internal stream would be broadcast to employees in Singapore, Zurich, Hyderabad, and more. Over 200,000 people would be watching. When he took the stage, there were no fancy intros. Just him, in a simple shirt, sleeves rolled. He began by telling them the truth about the leak, the investigation, the temporary hold on Code Blue. And then, unexpectedly, he told them the story of a NIL. He told them what it meant to be human in a world of machines. How kindness saved his life long before algorithms did. He told them that the company would start prioritizing people over performance empathy, over ego, that there would be changes, not just in policy. But in culture. As he spoke, something happened across offices around the globe. People stopped multitasking. They put down their phones and they listened. Some cried, others smiled, but all of them remembered why they came to work in the first place. And as Sundar finished, a single line appeared on the internal chat system pinned by someone in the Zurich office. It read, "Don't let the machine eat the man." It went viral inside the company. Printed on WHITEBORDS. Written in emails. Adopted as a quiet, powerful movement. The storm that had once threatened to shake the company had transformed into a wind of renewal. But just as peace returned to the halls of leadership, a new message appeared on Sundar's phone. Anonymous. Short. 5 words. You've forgotten something important. Asterisk, the forgotten promise. Screen glowed in the dark as Sundar stared at those 5 chilling words. You've forgotten something important. The message came with no name, no number, no digital fingerprint. His cybersecurity team later confirmed. It had been sent from an encrypted relay chain. Untraceable, unusual, even for a tech CEO used to being targeted. But this wasn't a threat. It was more unsettling than that. It was personal. Quiet, almost familiar. Asterisk. The timing of it gnawed at his thoughts. Everything had just begun to realign. His talk with the global team had sparked something rare: unity. The media's tone had shifted overnight from criticism to awe. Headlines praised his vulnerability. Employees flooded internal boards with messages of gratitude. And even Raymond Hartley had sent him a brief email that read simply, "I was wrong." And yet, beneath all the public success, those 5 words whispered like wind through a crack in the window. Not loud, not demanding, but constant. He couldn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety, but from questions. What had he forgotten? He lay, awake, replaying the past few days in his mind. The storm, the flight, Anna's final words, the boardroom, the speech. The story. And then it struck him, not like a sudden explosion, but like a memory rising from deep water. It wasn't a thing he had forgotten. It was a person. He sat up in bed and turned on the lamp. He reached for a notebook buried in his old backpack. the one he hadn't touched in years. It was filled with scribbles, old addresses, half-finished poems, even a few sketches. Near the back, tucked between worn pages, was a photograph faded, torn at the corner, but still intact. 3 people stood in front of a tiny one-bedroom apartment in San Jose. Al. Himself in younger, thinner days. And next to him, barely smiling, was a woman with braided hair and glasses too big for her face. Her name was Maya. Anil's daughter. How had he forgotten her? The guilt hit him like a cold wind. Maya had been a quiet presence back then. Gentle, smart, a bit older than Sundar. She was in nursing school while he studied engineering. She barely spoke during dinners, always scribbling in her textbooks or heading to her night shifts. But once, during one of the power outages that often hit their neighborhood, they had sat together on the front porch with only candlelight and shared stories about their dreams. She had told him, in a soft voice, "My father gives so much to everyone else. One day, I want to give something back to him." Sundar had said, "Me too." And then life moved on. He never saw her again. Had she been at the hospice? Did she even know Sundar had visited? The questions now churned in his chest. He stood up, pacing his apartment. The rain had returned, gentler now, like a whisper from the past. He called the hospice first thing in the morning. Nurse Lisa answered. "Maya?" She echoed. "Yes." She came a day before Mr. Anil passed. Sat with him all night. Never said much. Just held his hand. "But she left before you arrived. Do you have any way to contact her?" Sundar asked. "She didn't leave a number." "But she did leave something else." "What?" "An envelope. Addressed to you." Within hours, it arrived by courier. The paper was smooth, the ink flowing in careful. Neat lines so different from her father's trembling scrawl. "Dear Sundar, I saw your name on the visitor list. I knew you'd come. I knew you'd keep your promise to him, but I didn't stay to see you. Not out of anger, just time. That time has a way of taking people in different directions. You found yours. I stayed behind. Took care of him, watched him slowly fade while the world celebrated you. He never stopped being proud, even when you didn't call, even when you forgot birthdays. Even when he had to tell the nurse he'd once known the CEO of Google and they thought it was a joke, but he never stopped loving you. And I never stopped wondering if you would remember what you said that night on the porch, that you'd give something back. He's gone now, but I'm still here. My phone number, no. Return address, just that message, and now Sundar felt something he hadn't felt in years, a responsibility. Not tied to power, not to stockholders, not to the world, but to one person, Maya, the next day, Sundar cleared his entire calendar. He ignored calls, delayed meetings. He did something his staff hadn't seen him do in a decade. He disappeared without telling anyone why, but this time, it wasn't to chase a company crisis or court investors. This time, it was to keep a forgotten. Promised, he began with the hospice. They didn't have much. Just that Maya had mentioned she worked at a free clinic on the east side. One serving the homeless, the underinsured. The people most of the world ignored, he went there himself. The clinic was small, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The walls were cracked, the sign faded, but the line outside was long. People, with tired eyes and paper umbrellas, waited in silence, some leaning on crutches. Others holding children wrapped in worn blankets. He stepped through the door and quietly approached the front desk. The receptionist blinked twice, surprised. Are you who I think you are?" she asked. "I'm looking for Mia," he said softly. "Room 4, she whispered. Still stunned, he walked slowly, and when he reached room 4, he paused, inside. Maya stood beside an elderly woman, adjusting a pour, her voice soft and calm. She hadn't changed much, a little older. More lines around her eyes, but her presence still gentle. Still steady, she turned, saw him, and froze. Neither of them spoke. The air felt charged, not with tension, but with something harder to name too. Lifetimes overlapping in one tiny room. she finished with the patient. Then stepped out, closing the door behind her. They stood in the hallway, silence pressing between them like a third person. You came, she said finally. I should have come years ago. He answered. She looked away. Then back. Why now? Because I forgot something important, he said. And someone reminded me. Her eyes softened. The letter? Yes. A long pause. Then she smiled, faintly. You still drink chai with too much ginger? He laughed. Too much ginger is just enough. And in that moment, they weren't a CEO and a nurse. They were two people who had once shared stories by candlelight. Too. People who would love the same man. Walk with me? She said. And together, they walked outside, into the fading light of day, as the storm clouds above finally began to break. But the true storm, the one brewing quietly between past and present, was far from over. Asterisk the legacy we leave behind thee. Walked slowly beneath a gray sky softened by early light, the storm clouds above parting like curtains drawn back to reveal a quiet morning. The clinic stood behind them, weathered and tired, yet alive with purpose. Around them, the city buzzed in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the quiet reunion. Unfolding on the sidewalk between a global icon and a forgotten daughter of the man who once gave them both shelter. Maya didn't speak much as they walked. Sundar matched her silence with his own, neither needing to fill the air with small talk. Sometimes silence is not the absence of words, but the presence of understanding. Their footsteps echoed against the cracked concrete, every sound grounding them in a world that had changed so much, yet somehow brought them back to this single moment. He always believed in you, Maya said, finally, breaking the stillness. Even when the rest of us stopped expecting anything. He'd check the news just to see if you had a new interview, a speech, a project. I'd find him reading tech blogs with a dictionary next to him. Sundar stopped walking for a moment. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders hunched slightly, not from the cold, but from the invisible weight that still clung to him. I kept trying to build, he said. Build things that would change the world. Platforms, systems, ideas. But the whole time, I forgot the people who made it possible for me to even begin. Maya looked at him, the edges of her expression still guarded. It's easy to forget. The roots when the branches stretched that high. Those words stung, not in a cruel way, but because they were true. The kind of truth that stays with you. They kept walking until they reached a small community garden behind the clinic. Rows of vegetables and herbs lined raised beds. A few volunteers were watering plants, pulling weeds, arranging compost. It was the kind of place built not for attention, but for healing. He helped me start this, Maya said, pointing toward the garden. Back when the clinic couldn't afford much food for patients. We called it Annal's Patch. He always said, when you can't fix someone's health, at least you can feed their soul. Sundar kneeled beside a row of basil, running his fingers gently over the leaves. The scent brought back memories and of cooking late at night, humming old Tamil songs, filling their small apartment with warmth and steam. Maya, he said, standing, I want to do something. What? She asked, folding her arms. For your clinic? For your patients? For you? She hesitated, her eyes narrowing with caution. You mean a donation? No, he said. Not just a donation. Something bigger. Something lasting. He pulled out his phone and typed quickly, then handed it to her. She looked down and read the message draft. Effective immediately. Google Health, in partnership with the Pichai Family Foundation, will fund a new program named Annual Initiative. It will provide full medical coverage for underserved communities in California, expand free clinics statewide, and support sustainable food programs for all patient families. Led by Maya, nurse, caregiver, and daughter of the man who once made a CE possible. Maya blinked at the screen. He can't be serious, she whispered. I am, he replied. You don't have to do this. I know, Sundar said, but I want to. Because I can, and because I finally understand what he meant. Maya's voice caught. She looked away for a second, swallowing emotion. He would have been proud. I hope so. Sundar whispered. They stood in the garden a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. The sun began to rise higher, casting golden hues over the small patch of earth that had once been tended by a man who never asked for recognition, only that his kindness be remembered.